of Scotland, and it brightens up with mild air here across Wales and the southwest. Some sunny spells through the afternoon and clear skies developing across the southern half of the UK overnight, with a few fog patches forming. Whilst it stays damp across Scotland, mostly the persistent rain to the north of the central belt and falling as snow to lower levels, 200 to 300 metres, settling above 400 metres, could cause some issues on the roads, I think, first thing Christmas Eve. And for much of England, Wales, Northern Ireland, a dry start to the day, but watch out for that fog first thing, could be slow to clear. Where we avoid the fog and the low clouds, some signs of brightness through the central swathe of the UK before some heavy and persistent rain moves in from the southwest by the afternoon. The rain and mountain snow peter out across Scotland and northern England. Sunnier spells for the far north of Scotland, cold air here, and then really a three-way split for Christmas Eve, with this area of rain moving through central areas, Northern Ireland, North Wales, into parts of the Midlands and the southeast. To the north, much colder and clearer skies, whilst to the southwest it stays mild with some blustery showers moving in. It's going to be a windy Christmas day for many, rain through central areas, cold and bright in the far north.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Join me, Alex Phillips, for the afternoon agenda on GB News, Monday to Thursday from 4 p.m. till 6 p.m. We don't lecture to you or try to tell you what to think. We do a deep delve into a topic with views from across the range of debate, therefore leaving you, the viewer, to make up your own mind. Join me, Alex Phillips, for the afternoon agenda on GB News, 4 till 6, Monday to Thursday.
Join me, Nana Akweer, on Fridays, Saturdays and Sunday afternoons here on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as my panel and I take on some of the top stories hitting the headlines.
You can look up the statistics.
No, you look it up. I hug everyone I
Oh!
We learn from it and try and move on. That's it. Opinion is at the heart of the show. It's a place for open and frank conversation, but without the fear of cancellation. So join me here on GB News on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons between 4 and 6 p.m.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing, this lunchtime with me, Tom Harwood. Lots coming up today. Two studies suggest that people infected with Omicron are less likely to need hospital treatment. Plus, rough sleepers will be offered accommodation and will be encouraged to get a vaccine. And we'll talk about how Priti Patel wants to do more to protect freedom of speech. All that and more to come in the next hour. But first, it's the news with Tamsin Roberts.
Tom, thank you. Here are the top stories at 12 o'clock. Two early studies suggest that people infected with the Omicron strain of COVID-19 are less likely to need hospital treatment. Imperial College London, which led one of the studies, found people with the variant are up to 45% less likely to stay in hospital than those with the Delta strain. But research coming out of Scotland warns the mild nature of Omicron may be offset by its high level of transmission. The latest government data has recorded over 106,000 new daily COVID-19 cases. Dr. Andrew Preston told GB News there's still many unknowns about the new variant.
It does appear, at least in the cases we've seen, as you've just stated, that you do have a reduced risk of ending up in hospital if you do catch Omicron. But on the flip side, you've got a far greater risk of catching it in the first place. So how those two balance out as it spreads through into the older population, those with comorbidities, we still just don't know, I'm afraid.
Meanwhile, Labour is calling for the government to act urgently to support the theatre industry. Shadow Culture Secretary Lucy Powell told GB News the government's insurance policy isn't robust enough.
At the government's insurance scheme, a very expensive scheme that it set up many months ago for the live event sector, had that covered all aspects of potential sort of COVID interruption, not just the eventuality of a national lockdown. And many of these productions could have found themselves covered by insurance, which is what you would expect if a theatre show has to be cancelled due to an outbreak of a virus across the crew.
Scotland's Deputy First Minister says nightclubs will be closed in the country for at least 3 weeks from December the 27th. This comes on top of measures announced earlier this week by Nicola Sturgeon, which saw the return of additional restrictions. They include the requirement for 1 metre social distancing and a maximum capacity of 100 at a standing indoor event. The measures are thought to impact 150 clubs across the country. They now won't be able to operate without appropriate social distancing between groups and table service. Children in England with peanut allergies will be the first in Europe to receive life-changing treatment. NHS England has secured a deal for the oral treatment Palifausia, which helps to reduce the severity of reaction to eating peanuts, including anaphylaxis. Up to 600 children aged 4 to 17 are expected to be treated this year. Currently, peanut allergies affect 1 in 50 children in the UK. 2 London tube lines are facing major disruption as staff plan strike action for 6 months from next year. The Transport Union says it'll take place every weekend on the Central and Victoria nighttime services. The RMT also say they'll consider broadening action if conditions aren't improved for drivers. Members of an organised crime group who stole thousands of pounds in a series of ram raid burglaries have been jailed. 5 men were sentenced after pleading guilty to conspiring to burgle 3 premises in Westminster last year. Officers were able to identify them by using evidence from hours of CCTV, phone records and automated number plate recognition. The funeral for a 12-year-old schoolgirl who was stabbed to death has been held in Liverpool this morning. Ava White was killed after a Christmas light switch on in the city centre last month. She was taken to hospital after the attack, but police said she later died from catastrophic injuries. The UK car production saw its worst performance since 1984 last month, despite a surge in demand for electric vehicles. The Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders said November was the 5th consecutive month of decline. It dropped by 28.7%. British production of electric and hybrid cars took a record share, accounting for around a third of all cars made. It's been confirmed the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall will spend Christmas Day with the Queen. It'll be Her Majesty's first one without her husband, Prince Philip, who died in April this year. She'll also spend the festivities at Windsor Castle and not travel to Sandringham, as is tradition. Well, that's all your news for now. I'll have more in half an hour. Back now to the briefing and Tom Harwood.
Welcome back to the briefing. Coming up this hour, Two early studies suggest that people infected with the Omicron variant are less likely to need hospital treatment. We'll be looking at how the different nations in the UK are dealing with this variant with The Telegraph's Madeline Grant. Plus, I'll be joined by Brendan Chilton to look ahead to 2022 and analyse what the Labour Party needs to do in order to take full advantage of the division within the Tories. And later, Lord Moylan will join me live in the studio to discuss Priti Patel's mission to protect freedom of speech. And as always, give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me @gbnews, and we'll try and read out some of those at the end of the show. Well, first off, let's look at today's top story. Two early studies suggest that people with Omicron are less likely to need hospital treatment. Imperial College has found that people with this variant are 45% less likely to stay in hospital than those with Delta. But research coming out of Scotland warns that Omicron's mild nature may be offset by its higher transmissibility. The UK reported more than 100,000 new daily infections for the first time yesterday. Plus, Wales and Northern Ireland announced further restrictions which will kick in after Christmas. Boris Johnson has ruled out any changes to England before Christmas as well. Well, joining me to dissect all of this is Daily Telegraph columnist Madeline Grant. Welcome to the programme, Madeline. First of all, it's looking a little bit lopsided in the United Kingdom. We've seen that Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland have imposed post-Christmas restrictions. Is it inevitable that England will follow suit?
I wouldn't say inevitable, no, because there are serious issues for the Prime Minister with getting things through. I think it's quite likely, but we've already seen how the Cabinet can close ranks against him, and he's not in a particularly strong position at the moment. He's already had to rely on opposition votes to get COVID passes through the Commons. So I'm not saying it's unlikely. I think it's pretty likely, but it's certainly going to meet much stronger resistance than previous efforts to do so. And I think there are some members of Cabinet, in fact, a good slice of Cabinet, are being quite sort of bullish. They want to see really firm and unarguable data before they will agree to go back into those restrictions.
And it appears that the data may well be leaning slightly closer to the side of the anti-restriction tribe within the Conservative Party, not just those two studies that show a lower propensity to be hospitalised with Omicron, but also the fact that London cases seem to be levelling off in the last few days, not rising exponentially, but hovering around that 100,000 mark.
Yes, that's right. And these two latest studies that you mentioned, or rather the one from Imperial, it seems to show that what people were suggesting from looking at the data from South Africa was correct, and that it does tend to offer a less severe form of infection than previous variants. And I think actually, if what's happening in London continues, the plateauing of cases, and it does turn into more of a decline, that has happened with not a lockdown, but voluntary lockdown, so to speak, with people deciding unilaterally to go to less stuff to maintain social distance and all that jazz. And all the while, we were told for a very long time that the public wasn't capable of making those calculations. They really needed things to be ordered. And actually, if cases continue to plateau and decline without the need for further restrictions, it does show that either that people can be trusted, or that perhaps the restrictions that are being brought in elsewhere in the United Kingdom, and there's, as you say, a fair bit of variation, perhaps these things haven't had much of an impact.
It's interesting seeing all of this voluntary action, because there are a lot of hospitality businesses that are really suffering at the moment. We've heard a lot of their stories on GB News over the last week of cancelled bookings, of theatres closing down for Christmas, over pubs stopping trading really completely over what should be their busiest period of the year. Is there trouble here? Is there trouble here when you have only voluntary action? Perhaps the government feels less like it should be offering support to those businesses.
Yeah, I mean that is the great conundrum. The trouble is that at some point we have to know what learning to live with it looks like, because when in future years, it's likely that, as always happens in the winter, that infections will shoot up, and I think people certainly some government support is needed right now for the hospitality industry. But I think in future years, people will need to think, if I do go along with this, if I do refuse to, I cancel the panto and I don't go to the pub, be aware that there are livelihoods that are being lost, that we will be poor as a country, and we will lose a lot of what makes this time of year so special.
I'm interested, looking at these graphs that show this sort of plateauing, that we may well have lopped the peak off the top of this virus, that we might avoid that huge sort of hundreds of thousands of cases a day leading to real damaging hospitalisations that could gum up the NHS more than it's normally gummed up every single winter. I wonder if we manage to, with sort of voluntary action, successfully avoid that, and it's not certain that we will, Christmas could still pose a problem, particularly with the intergenerational mixing that it brings with it. But if it doesn't, will there be political consequences of Mark Drakeford and Nicola Sturgeon in particular sort of jumping the gun on restrictions and hurting businesses in the way that they have? And could this be a bit of a saving moment for Boris Johnson, a Prime Minister who's found himself in the doldrums over the last couple of weeks? Could he actually have a bit of a turnaround in the polls if this all plays out well for him?
Well, I don't know. I can't be Mystic Meg on something like that. But I do think that that there possibly there won't be a comeuppance, because historically the people pushing for lockdown who get their measures in place, they can always say, because we don't know what the counterfactual would have been, they'll say, oh, it would have been even higher without the restrictions. We've saved us from something much worse. But I definitely think in this case, when we have the kind of the guinea pig experiment of what happens to England, what happens to Scotland, if we have in England 2 weeks without any lockdown, cases meaningfully peak and hospitalisations remain manageable, then I think that does rather not demolish, but it certainly whittles away at the case for future lockdowns. We've already seen how, even in the Prime Ministers over the course of the year, obviously there have been some catastrophic failures and mishandlings, but certainly there were a lot of the pro-lockdown people who made themselves look pretty silly with the hyperbolic rhetoric they used when the Prime Minister was going ahead with reopening in the summer. Had Keir Starmer talking about the Johnson variant and Boris the Butcher and Plague Island, and they haven't at all been vindicated by what happened after that. And I think for that to happen again, that will certainly cement what is already visible in the opinion polls, that more and more people in Britain are saying that actually the harm of lockdown outweighs the benefits.
It's interesting. I've seen a number of commentators, not least actually politicians and former politicians, Andy Burnham this morning, Tony Blair this week as well, and many commentators who've been on the more sort of pro-restriction side of things, potentially thinking now that sort of after 2 years of all of this, the bar that we need to reach to deploy restrictions has actually been raised, that the willingness of the British people to go along with further restrictions is weakening. Is that your view?
I think that's true. It's definitely the public's tolerance for it is weakening. And I think also just that sense that when does this ever end? Because, people who've been double or triple jabbed, people who've done everything that they were told to do, who've been careful, who've made huge sacrifices, are finding that despite the fact that vaccines were sort of promised to be the route outside, and they're not able to, there's still an appetite amongst some people to kind of continue to live as if vaccines hadn't come along and changed the game. And I think people need to know what is the logical endpoint of all of this. If not now, then when? Because it always seems that you get into a position that looks strong, and then there's another sort of, just a bit more. And I do think that public appetite for that is waning. Not to mention the fact that it's hugely expensive. We simply can't afford to keep living in this cycle of locking up, locking down, locking up, locking down at the whims of the graphs or the politicians.
I think it'll be very, very interesting to see. We know there are going to be no restrictions this side of Christmas, but I'm sure that we will be watching with eagle eyes as to what the Prime Minister decides to do at the start of next week. But for now, Madeline Grant of the Daily Telegraph, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon on The Briefing. Now, business leaders in Northern Ireland have slammed the country's new COVID restrictions as unacceptable and unforgivable. Stormont ministers yesterday announced nightclubs will close from Boxing Day after its highest daily increase of coronavirus cases was recorded. Our Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie has the story.
This intervention is informed by the medical and scientific advice, and it takes account of the wider economic and societal impacts. So from the 27th of December, we are asking people to limit mixing to a maximum of 3 households. There'll be guidance in terms of emphasising the importance of working from home where possible, and that's going to be strengthened. There will be a legal requirement for businesses to take reasonable measures to achieve 2 metre social distancing in office spaces or where that cannot be achieved to provide alternative mitigations. We will be encouraging regular workplace testing, and that's going to be strongly encouraged. The requirements around face coverings will be strengthened. There will be a legal duty on businesses to take all reasonable steps to minimise the transmission of COVID. There will be a requirement to be seated in indoor hospitality venues, and a maximum of 6 people can be seated together in an indoor hospitality venue. And from 6 a.m. on the 26th of December, nightclubs will be closed. Indoor dancing and indoor standing events will not be allowed.
Michelle O'Neill, the Deputy First Minister, spelling out the new regulations. Nightclubs have been open for just 7 weeks, after being closed for 87. The hospitality sector has took the financial hit once more, but just how bad is it?
Pre-COVID, we're Northern Ireland's 4th largest private sector employer. By a third of all Northern agri-food, account for 2/3 of tourism spend. Today, we estimate just in the Christmas period alone, our industry has lost between 250 to 300 million. That's the money that carries us through January and February. We are officially open, but effectively closed.
It's just not hotels and bars that will suffer. The supply chain is vast and planning for pricing essential.
Well, my job as I own and run this business is we've got to set plans. We think about how we're going to sell in the next 12 months or the next 3 years. So we're used to that. So the constant stop-start nature of the last 22 months has been so difficult for me. It's been really difficult for my 650 staff, but also my 4,000 customers, as they've had to stock up, lose stock, and it's the in-out, stop-start nature I think has been the hardest. But I think we all thought we were going to have a good Christmas this year, and I think what has happened in the last few weeks has been so frustrating because we have not been given any insight, any knowledge, any help or understanding as to what's going to happen. We've stocked up, so we've got a much higher stock holding due to the realities of supply chain, due to the realities of Brexit, and Christmas hasn't happened this year. But I feel sorry for my customers who have bookings made, planning to have big parties, big gatherings in the last few days in terms of their restaurants or their hotels, and they've just been obliterated with sales, with no knowledge of what's coming next, no grants for them, and just fear. I think that's been fear and frustration, I think, have been the key things. They've been phoning me saying, Andrew, what are you hearing? So it's that unknown that I think is so difficult for our customers. We've been here time and again, last March, last kind of winter, then again in January, then again the summer. Regulations have chopped and changed, and that is very difficult for the hospitality industry.
The hospitality sector believes that you have closed them by stealth because you haven't got the money to actually replace it. What do you say to those people in the hospitality sector that have took such a financial hit? And what do you say, more importantly, to the staff in it, that for Christmas they've basically been handed a P45?
Well, we have pressed for a wage subsidy scheme, and we want that, but we need the UK government to introduce that scheme. It was there in the past. We believe that hospitality has a particular requirement for that. It is the workers that are going to feel the impact in terms of the decisions that have had to be taken, necessary because of the pandemic. So the Treasury should reinstate furlough immediately and allow us to reach to that to be able to support workers through this trying time.
With no plans in place, the private sector are frustrated and hope that the government will have some forward thinking.
I think what we've got to do is get away from a battle that seems to have been raging about health versus the economy. They need to come together, and I think we would like more recognition that the private sector has a huge role to play here in Northern Ireland. We'd love to see much more inward investment and trying to grow jobs. Look, the health service has done an incredible job under incredibly difficult circumstances, but so have my lorry drivers, so have my staff and my food outlets, and lots of other hospitality industries who've kept people fed and watered throughout this pandemic. I think we need better long-term thinking, and we need government to make those tough decisions.
Douglas Beattie, GB News, Stormont.
And thanks to Doogie for bringing us that news from Northern Ireland, part of our country that I don't think we cover enough about domestic issues. Really, really important there. Well, after the break, homeless people will be offered accommodation and encouraged to get jabbed this winter in an effort to combat the Omicron variant. We'll be talking about that with Conservative MP Bob Blackman, co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group on ending homelessness. But first, here's the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. A cloudy and damp day to come across northern and eastern parts of the UK, whilst it turns brighter and milder towards the southwest following earlier rainfall. It is cold, though, for the far north. That cold air has been pushed out of the way by milder southwesterlies, low pressure to the west of the UK, and two weather fronts now steadily moving across the country, tending to merge together. So I think for many, it's a cloudy afternoon, a lot of grey sky and a damp one for parts of eastern England, more persistent rain for northern England, moving through Northern Ireland and then pushing into much of Scotland, falling as snow off the tops of the mountains in Scotland, whilst it stays drier and colder in the far north of Scotland, and it brightens up with mild air here across Wales and the southwest. Some sunny spells through the afternoon and clear skies developing across the southern half of the UK overnight, with a few fog patches forming. Whilst it stays damp across Scotland, mostly the persistent rain to the north of the central belt and falling as snow to lower levels, 200 to 300 metres, settling above 400 metres, could cause some issues on the roads, I think, first thing Christmas Eve. And for much of England, Wales, Northern Ireland, a dry start to the day, but watch out for that fog first thing, could be slow to clear. Where we avoid the fog and the low clouds, some signs of brightness through the central swathe of the UK before some heavy and persistent rain moves in from the southwest by the afternoon. The rain and mountain snow peter out across Scotland and northern England. Sunnier spells for the far north of Scotland, cold air here, and then really a three-way split for Christmas Eve, with this area of rain moving through central areas, Northern Ireland, North Wales, into parts of the Midlands and the southeast. To the north, much colder and clearer skies, whilst to the southwest it stays mild with some blustery showers moving in. It's going to be a windy Christmas day for many, rain through central areas, cold and bright in the far north.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Welcome back. Now, plans have been announced to offer accommodation and encourage rough sleepers to get a vaccine this winter. This is part of the Protect and Vaccinate scheme, which will provide an extra £28 million in funding for mobile clinics' outreach work in shelters to inform people about the dangers of the virus. And money given to councils to provide safe accommodation as well. The government is hoping that offering accommodation post-vaccination will improve uptake, as some rough sleepers are hesitant about the side effects while living on the streets. Well, let's talk now to Bob Blackman. He's the Conservative MP for Harrow East and also the co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group for ending homelessness. Welcome to the programme, Bob. First of all, £28 million to end homelessness. Is it enough?
Well, obviously, this is part of what the government is providing in terms of funding. There's a substantial amount of money being issued to local authorities to combat homelessness in its wider sense. Obviously, at the start of the pandemic, huge amounts of effort were put in under the Everyone In project, and 37,000 people were assisted under that programme. One of the problems we do know, of course, is that at this time of year, the weather is much colder. They're often charities and other organisations organise hostel accommodation, which, of course, with COVID spreading is not ideal, to put it mildly. So people do need separate rooms. They need separation so that they're not spreading COVID amongst them, and they need to be vaccinated. We do know, of course, that the best route of preventing the spread of COVID is vaccination. And people that are sleeping rough, people that are literally on the streets, don't necessarily go and get vaccines in the same way as other people do. So a lot of work was done at the beginning of the vaccination programme to try and vaccinate rough sleepers. Now we've got to do far more. And of course, with the new variant, the problem is that spreads far more easily, and people do need to have that booster jab as well as their 2 previous doses. Once again, the other problem is that people that are rough sleeping lead chaotic lives, and that they won't know whether it's been the right length of time between their various different doses to make sure they get the booster at the right time. So this time of the year, it's absolutely crucial that we get those people vaccinated, because otherwise they will suffer very badly.
I can imagine the logistics of this operation being incredibly hard to deliver, getting the data in terms of who is actually out there on the streets, if they've had a previous jab, if this is number 2, number 3, number 1, who knows, and getting and knowing exactly where the people are to deliver those vaccines as well. This is a Herculean effort. Is there
it's a
money
huge
going
effort.
in?
One of the problems is that the rough sleepers won't be registered with GPs. They may not even have a national health number. So keeping track of whether they've had their vaccine and so on is very difficult. So that's why the government is obviously putting money up to promote this. And what I would encourage people to do is, if they know of anyone that is rough sleeping or they're aware of that, is to report that to the appropriate health authority so they can take action. Report it to the charities, because they are the ones that often are reaching out to people. One of our problems, I mentioned 37,000 people being helped under everyone in. At that time, I think the rough sleeper count was something like 8,500 people in England sleeping rough. Well, clearly that was completely wrong. And so we do know there's huge numbers of people that are in this perilous position. We also know that there's something like 300,000 people sofa surfing at any one time who become homeless and become the next rough sleepers. So it's important that we reach out to those people. I think councils all over the country are setting up walk-in clinics over the Christmas period and over the New Year period, so that people literally walk in, get vaccinated, and then be safe. And that's got to be the way forward.
Undoubtedly, the Everyone In scheme from March 2020 was a huge success. 37,000 people getting shelter, but also hundreds of lives saved, it's estimated. Why did it take a pandemic to start treating homelessness with the seriousness the issue deserves?
Well, I think one of the problems here is that, as I said, the rough sleeper count was sitting about 8,500. The 37,000 people that were taken in under Everyone In demonstrates that the rough sleeper count is at best, just an estimate really of the numbers of people that are forced to sleep rough. We do know that there's large numbers of pressures on this. I've mentioned the people that, of course, are sofa surfing. It's also estimated that 300,000 people are in severe rent arrears because of the pandemic, and they may end up being rough sleeping if we don't take further action. So there's huge amounts of people here are affected. One of the other problems is that the government haven't collected data on the people that have no recourse to public funds. These are people, and they come in various different forms, but basically people that are not allowed to work and they're not allowed to claim benefits in this country. And therefore, when they fall on hard times, they're forced to sleep rough. Now, the government don't have data on that. We've said that they should gather data on it so that we know exactly the scale of the problem here so that we can actually deal with it. At the moment, because the data isn't there, it is very hard to estimate what the impact is. But what we do know is that there are large numbers of people still in hotels or temporary accommodation who have no recourse to public funds and indeed are in inadequate accommodation. So that's got to be addressed as well. Also, during the pandemic, although Everyone In was a programme at the beginning, further people emerged as rough sleepers during the pandemic and had to be assisted. And unfortunately, at this time of year, there are still more people emerging onto the streets as rough sleepers. I would urge anyone that is in that position to go to their local authority and gain assistance. They will be entitled to some form of assistance, and they shouldn't be sleeping rough in any case, but particularly during this cold weather.
Really good advice there. Thank you for that. A really tricky issue to solve, but hopefully we can get some way to closing that gap. Bob Blackman, thank you. Conservative MP and, of course, co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Ending Homelessness. Well, still to come, I'll be joined in the studio live with Lord Moylan to discuss Priti Patel, who's encouraging police to do more to protect freedom of speech. But for now, it's the news with Tamsin Roberts.
Tom, thank you. Here are the top stories. Two early studies suggest that people infected with the Omicron strain of COVID-19 are less likely to need hospital treatment. Imperial College London, which led one of the studies, found people with the variant are up to 45% less likely to stay in hospital than those with the Delta strain. But research coming out of Scotland warns the mild nature of Omicron may be offset by its high level of transmission. Scotland's Deputy First Minister says nightclubs will be closed in the country for at least 3 weeks from December the 27th. This comes on top of measures announced earlier this week by Nicola Sturgeon, which saw the return of additional restrictions. They include the requirement for 1 metre social distancing and a maximum capacity of 100 at a standing indoor event. The measures are thought to impact 150 clubs across the country, who now won't be able to operate without appropriate social distancing between groups and table service. The funeral for a 12-year-old schoolgirl who was stabbed to death has been held in Liverpool this morning. Ava White was killed after a Christmas light switch on in the city centre last month. Police say she died from catastrophic injuries. Clarence House has confirmed the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall will spend Christmas Day with the Queen. It'll be Her Majesty's first year without her husband Prince Philip, who died in April this year. She'll spend the day at Windsor Castle for a second year and not travel to Sandringham, as is tradition. You're right up to date. I'll be back with more on today's news stories at the top of the hour. Now it's back to Tom.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, recent figures show that almost 1 million people have experienced mental health problems for the first time since the start of the pandemic. Experts say the sharp rise is caused by post-pandemic stress disorder as people experience a lack of social contact due to having to work from home or furlough. More than 900,000 Brits aged 18 to 39 have had referrals for illnesses such as anxiety or depression since the first lockdown. Well, let's talk about all of this with Matt King. He's the Chief Executive of TrustLinks, an independent mental health charity based in Essex. Welcome to the programme, Matt. First of all, have you seen your workload increase over the course of these 2 years of pandemic-related lockdowns in the country?
Absolutely, Tom. The anxiety, the depression, the sense of hopelessness and the confusion that people are experiencing out in the community has really had a massive impact on the work of TrustLinks. So we've seen a massive referral of people from mental health services, from primary care, from the community, coming through to our services and requiring lots of additional support. That extra level of anxiety, the stress, the depression, the suicidal ideation that people are experiencing is having a really significant impact on a lot of people in our communities.
I wonder if we've started to turn a corner on the way that we discuss mental health problems in this country. Perhaps a silver lining of what's gone on in the last 2 years is that across the political spectrum, people have started to raise the issue of mental health much more willingly. People are talking about it in contemporary political discourse much more readily. Is that something you've experienced?
Oh, massively. So I've been in this role for 10 years, and over the years, mental health was very much stigmatised. It was very much not talked about. It was very much the Cinderella service of the NHS, and it didn't have the resources that it needed. And we've seen through the pandemic that the awareness of mental health has raised significantly. People are talking about it much more. Celebrities are coming out and talking about their own mental health, and its profile has raised massively, and everybody's so much more aware of their mental health and their well-being. And then they're able to talk about it and seek support from other people. So as you say, there's definitely been a silver lining from COVID, that we're much more aware of our mental health, we're much more able to talk about it, we're able to access the support that we need. Obviously, the resources need to flow with that, so we need to see more investment in mental health services, particularly in the voluntary and community sector, where we can have such a big impact on people's lives. For a relatively small amounts of money, we can really make that difference. We're seeing so many more people coming forward to volunteer, to support us, to work with us, and our service has literally doubled in the last 2 years because of COVID and the impact of the demand and also the available resources.
Wow, that is an incredible statistic that your service has doubled. I wonder if we're on the edge of something worrying now too, in that not that there are legal restrictions upon people, but people may well feel restricted in what they can do, feel like they need to stay at home anyway, or indeed the dangling prospect of further restrictions in the future, particularly at this time of year when there's seasonal affective disorder with the short days and long nights. Potentially people are feeling pretty miserable about this January to come. Do you have any advice for people that may not be feeling themselves watching this programme at home today?
As you say, Tom, it is a really worrying time for people. Having that anxiety around the Omicron variant, over the risks of what you can do, what you can't do, it's really not clear, is it? And we've got that pressure and that stress on us, as you say, with the seasonal affective disorder, and also with Christmas being on us. People don't know what to do, but I would really say keep in touch with people. I think the most important thing is that social connection. So keeping in touch with your friends, with your family, with any support services that you've got. Your GP is always there. You can always access them. There are obviously the 111 mental health line there, and also going to A&E if you're in mental health crisis. So there are support services out there for people, whatever their level of need. But obviously getting out in the daytime while it is light is a really good thing to do. So getting a bit of fresh air, a bit of sunlight, making sure you eat healthily, get good sleep, hydrate, and connect with people. And I think at the moment, particularly where there is that anxiety, there is that stress, there is that social isolation, just getting an opportunity to go out for a walk with somebody, have a chat with somebody and connect, and also do positive activities. Think of the things that you enjoy, whether that's knitting or gardening or reading or doing something that's positive and productive, can have such a boost. So at TrustLinks, we run therapeutic gardening projects. We have a whole load of courses and workshops to help people with their mental health. We have music groups and craft, and there's lots of other charities very similar to us around the country. So I would say reach out to your local charities, your local community groups, even your church halls. There's always some place to go to connect to other people, and just, seek the positive.
Well, thank you for that, Matt King. Those really good words of advice there as we enter what can be a pretty tough time of year for a lot of people. Of course, Matt King there, Chief Executive of TrustLinks, the independent mental health charity. Well, moving on now, the European Commission has started legal action against Poland over rulings by the country's constitutional court that challenge the supremacy of EU law. The EU executive says it has serious concerns about the Polish Constitutional Tribunal and its recent case law, giving as an example rulings where the court has challenged the primacy of EU law explicitly. In July, Poland's Constitutional Tribunal ruled that measures imposed by the European Court of Justice were unconstitutional, with warnings of a legal Polexit. I'm not quite sure how that portmanteau works, but Polexit. We'll go with it for now. Well, joining me is Polish journalist George Basinski to discuss all of this. Welcome to the programme, George. Is it really that surprising that the European Court, that the European Executive, that the European Commission is pursuing legal action against Poland when Poland is directly challenging one of the rules of the club. And the rules of the club, the rules of being a member of the European Union, is that European law is superior to domestic law.
The situation is not as clear. There are a number of cases currently being discussed in German, Italian courts about the competencies of the European Court. To give you a little bit of a perspective on why is Poland targeted, Poland created the first constitution in Europe over 200 years ago. Since then, we had a number of exterior powers trying to remodel it or interfere in our judiciary and our independence. Poland is slightly sensitive, maybe even oversensitive, when other bureaucrats from other countries, from other powers, are dictating to Poland what to do. Since the 90s, since the fall of communism, we have a constitution, a new constitution, and a constitutional tribunal. This tribunal is the only body in Poland empowered to adjudicate on compliance with the constitution. For some reason, the European Court of Justice now usurps the powers that it does not have. And I think that this is very important and crucial. Nobody stated that the Court of Justice of the European Union can discuss, well, it can discuss perhaps, but it cannot empower or trump the Polish constitution. There are a number of constitutions in Europe, and they're still existent. EU is still not a federal union. It is not a completely federalized state. It cannot just throw to the bin the constitution and the constitution tribunals of its member states.
Position of the Polish government here, not that that they should be able to break EU law, but that the EU is sort of overstepping, that this isn't what the European Union competency is or should be in the first place.
Absolutely. When Poland and numerous other countries joined the European Union, at that time it was completely unthinkable to even realize a situation as it is today, where people from Brussels, without knowing, many of them, at least they wouldn't come up with such ridiculous statements on Poland, and the pressuring now Poland. I have heard from British politicians that UK, during the most heated debate on Brexit with Brussels, was not treated the way Poland is treated now from Brussels. The insults, the threats, the decision to have competencies trumping over the Polish Constitutional Court is truly shocking, and it is fueling Eurosceptic feelings in Poland. As I said before, Poles are slightly sensitive about supremacy of our national law. It is unknown to me why the EU is targeting Poland, while some other countries have a very similar situation and made similar decisions. And some states, Kingdom of the Netherlands, doesn't even have a constitutional tribunal, but they are not attacked. The Polish Constitutional Tribunal is attacked by Brussels. It is very dangerous, especially with all the other conflicts and issues that the EU has. A few weeks ago, everybody saw what happened on the Polish-Belarus border with artificially created migrant crisis by an authoritarian Belarus. Yet the EU is discussing and attacking its own member states. It is very sad and concerning, and I really hope that a dialogue will be found.
Well, thank you for bringing us that analysis there over a really quite concerning situation, one that may well be counterproductive for the interests of the European Union in the long term. Well, George Brzezinski, the Polish journalist, thank you for joining us on the briefing this afternoon. Now, our final story of the day. Priti Patel has said that police should investigate actual crimes, not hurt feelings. This is after judges ruled that recording non-crime hate incidents risks interfering with people's right to express their opinions. The Home Secretary will try to enshrine in law a new code of practice that controls the way officers can record such incidents. Well, I'm delighted to be joined in the studio now by Lord Moylan, Conservative member of the House of Lords, who's been campaigning on this issue. For how long have these so-called non-crime hate incidents been part of our policing framework? It seems that sort of the media has come across these relatively recently.
Well, it's only been going on for the last few years since we started having hate crimes. So if you have a hate crime, it's a crime where somebody perceives that the motivation for the crime is hatred of a particular group. So then the question arises, well, what if you have the hatred, but you don't have a crime associated with it? So nothing you can prosecute. And those have been categorized as non-crime hate incidents, but they're recorded by the police very often on their crime database against somebody's name if they know who the perpetrator was. And sometimes they're as trivial as saying something on Twitter on the hot button issue of whether a man can become a woman just by saying that that's what they've done. And the case that's been in the courts recently was about, in fact, an ex-policeman who did exactly that. And there was a complaint from somebody he didn't know that he was expressing transphobia. So the police turn up at his place of work and they record all of this. And if he was then, there's a separate issue. One is recording, but then there's a separate issue of disclosure. If he was applying for a job that required an enhanced criminal record check, so a teacher, social worker, and so on, it's very possible that that non-crime would be disclosed, and that can well affect, and we know that in particular cases that has affected, the prospects of somebody getting a job. So there are three questions, really. The first is, who gives the guidance to the police on doing this? The second is, what does the guidance say? And the third is, what are the rules about disclosure? And on the first one, the amendment I had in the House of Lords covered all three of those, but to some extent. But the first part of it said it should no longer be the College of Policing giving that guidance, because that at the moment is the people who do it. It should be the Home Secretary through a statutory instrument. And I'm glad to say I haven't seen the amendment that the Home Secretary is going to put down, but I'm glad to say she seems to have accepted that part. So it will become statutory, it will be subject to democratic oversight for the first time. Then the next question is, what is the guidance going to say? And that I certainly haven't seen what she's going to change or what's new, but in writing it, she will have to take account now of the decision in the Court of Appeal this week that the way in which the police do some of these things has a chilling effect on freedom of expression. So I think she's going to have to take account of that. And then the third question is about disclosure. And there the Home Office say, we already have statutory guidance on that, which is perfect. It is beyond improvement. And we don't want to change that at all. And I think Priti Patel needs to engage with that. I don't know if she's going to. I think she needs to engage with that because most people don't think it's perfect and they don't think that it's working in the way that it should. So those are the three parts of the issue.
It's interesting to see that some of these the issues that get picked up in the media tend to be ones that don't seem to have even a particularly targeted victim. It's sort of anyone can sort of see anything that's published anywhere, claim that they feel targeted by that and have this all logged and go through the systems of the police.
But this goes back to the first part of what you say, goes back to the whole notion of a hate crime. Now, we all have some sympathy with hate crimes. I mean, if you're going to go around beating people up, specifically because of their race, we'd all think that that was, I suppose, worse than just beating them up. That's what the law now says. You get a longer sentence. You get a longer sentence if you beat somebody up because of their race. But the whole notion of a hate crime is that it is directed at a particular group of people. So it would be directed at Pakistanis or Muslims or
transgender
or gay
people
or whatever,
who
are specified in the law. So in a sense, it's never if it's a crime, it will have a real victim, but the victim of the hate has to be a group of people, not just an individual. You can't say, I'm beating you up, Tom, because I can't stand you. That wouldn't be a hate crime. That would be, I'd be done for GBH or whatever. But it wouldn't be a hate crime.
Yes. I wonder what specifically about the guidance can change to try and foster a more liberal attitude towards this, to make sure that people's tweets don't get policed in the way that they currently are, but to allow the genuine qualms that people have over that sort of hate crime to still be looked into?
Well, I think the whole question of a non-crime hate incident and what it actually means has to be examined. What we are mostly concerned about, you and I, ordinary people, are concerned about actual crimes that have victims, and very often crimes of violence. And a hate crime could actually be any crime in principle, but mostly they're crimes of violence or verbal abuse or assault or disorder, things of that sort. And when we move into non-crime hate incidents, we're very often talking about the expression of an opinion in circumstances that aren't a crime and don't give rise to a prosecution.
And just
I think you can take all those out, couldn't you? You could take all those.
And very, very quickly, I'm afraid we're running up against the back of the programme. What's the time frame here? How soon are we likely to see further guidance? How soon are we likely to see changes?
Well, we're going to see the Home Secretary's amendment in the first half of January, because she's going to put it down, I believe, during report stage of the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill, and there are only 3 days left for that in the House of Lords, and they're in early January. So we're going to see the amendment then. Whether she publishes the guidance at the same time, in my amendment, she'd have had 6 months in which to do that. So I don't know quite what her programme is for that, because I haven't seen it. We might see it early January. We should, if we don't see it then, see it soon after the bill is enacted.
Well, no doubt this is something we will return to then.
Good.
In January. It's a very important issue and something that rightly exercises people. Lord Moylan, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon on the last edition of The Briefing at lunchtime of the year.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much. You've been watching The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood. Up next, it's Nana Akua, but for now, I'll leave you for the last time this year with the weather forecast.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. A cloudy and damp day to come across northern and eastern parts of the UK, whilst it turns brighter and milder towards the southwest following earlier rainfall. It is cold, though, for the far north. That cold air has been pushed out of the way by milder southwesterlies, low pressure to the west of the UK, and two weather fronts now steadily moving across the country, tending to merge together. So I think for many, it's a cloudy afternoon, a lot of grey sky and a damp one for parts of eastern England, more persistent rain for northern England, moving through Northern Ireland and then pushing into much of Scotland, falling as snow off the tops of the mountains in Scotland, whilst it stays drier and colder in the far north of Scotland, and it brightens up with mild air here across Wales and the southwest. Some sunny spells through the afternoon and clear skies developing across the southern half of the UK overnight, with a few fog patches forming. Whilst it stays damp across Scotland, mostly the persistent rain to the north of the central belt and falling as snow to lower levels, 200 to 300 metres, settling above 400 metres, could cause some issues on the roads, I think, first thing Christmas Eve. And for much of England, Wales, Northern Ireland, a dry start to the day, but watch out for that fog first thing, could be slow to clear. Where we avoid the fog and the low clouds, some signs of brightness through the central swathe of the UK before some heavy and persistent rain moves in from the southwest by the afternoon. The rain and mountain snow peter out across Scotland and northern England. Sunnier spells for the far north of Scotland, cold air here, and then really a three-way split for Christmas Eve, with this area of rain moving through central areas, Northern Ireland, North Wales, into parts of the Midlands and the southeast. To the north, much colder and clearer skies, whilst to the southwest it stays mild with some blustery showers moving in. It's going to be a windy Christmas day for many, rain through central areas, cold and bright in the far north.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.